Hi, so this is David Gilroy from Conscious Solutions, and welcome to the first of a series of video interviews we're doing over the next few weeks. And I'm pleased to be joined today by Viv Williams, who's our consulting director at Symphony Legal. And Viv and I are just going to talk through some of the issues we've seen operationally with law firms over the first 4 weeks of the coronavirus COVID-19 crisis, and obviously the last 3 weeks of lockdown, with at least 3 more weeks to come. So Viv, in general terms, what have you seen, what kind of effect the lockdowns had for most law firms?
Hello, everybody. I think it depends very much on the quality of the firm. Invariably, where the banks have stepped in to lend money to law firms, it's firms who are profitable and looking rather well. There's a lot of firms out there who cannot get any form of funding at all. So I think the challenge has been having the right proposal to put forward to their bank. But as we know, we're about a third of the applications have been granted. And I've had several managing partners of law firms coming on saying, what do we do now? Because we can't get, they've turned us down for a loan. So I think we've seen opportunities in certain areas of law and big challenges in other. The start, I think, of a large number of failures.
Okay, so give me a précis of the specific areas of your law that are challenged at this time, and which ones you've seen hold up pretty well. I think I know the obvious one you're going to start with first.
Yeah, property and conveyancing has been a complete shambles. Most people have now got maybe 3 or 4 weeks of work in progress on property. Although I did hear today that a law firm that does a lot of international work started to see more inquiries coming in from the Far East. So that may be a glimmer of hope for those firms. But certainly with the move of people not moving house, it's going to be a really difficult time for law firms in the conveyancing sector. Bizarrely, about 6 weeks ago, I was lecturing at the Conveyancing Association annual conference, and we were predicting then that we would see a significant drop in the numbers of law firms actually doing conveyancing because they couldn't afford to compete. This will only exacerbate that. We will see more and more firms failing because they can't actually get the work through. So property is a real challenge. Anything to do with property, anything to do with commercial work has fallen off a cliff. And bizarrely, the only ways that we're seeing improvements in some firms is an area of wills, lasting powers of attorney, and bizarrely probate.
Yeah, and obviously employment's holding up, relatively speaking. I know I've been speaking with a couple of firms just this week saying, we'd like to design and implement employment law retainer service. I'm like, what, right now, today, before the end of the week kind of thing. It's something firms have been thinking about for a long time, and I suspect those firms who've had those kind of retainer schemes have done really well from it. I know one client actually, every time they get an employment client phone saying, oh, you're not on our retainer package, would you like to go onto it? It's a 2-year minimum period, but you'll only have to pay a few £100s a month rather than a few thousand, and we'll do the same amount of work. And they can't write the contracts fast enough, because anybody who looks at that and goes, I'll take 2 years worth of payments to save me £5,000 in the short term. Yep. So I think that getting retainer models has been something law firms have talked about for years, isn't it? That they've just not been able to do quick enough.
Employment as well, but it's never really taken off. But it's the environment we're living in today that encourages people to look for that.
And so what's your views on how quickly Res Prop comes back? So let's leap forward. Anecdotal from my business, one of my team was about to exchange on a house at the end of March, and clearly they didn't progress it. And I asked him on a call last week, I said, so what's your plan? Straight back to it after lockdown? He said, no, we've delayed it 12 months. He said, we're just going to start looking again in 12 months. He said, now's not the time to be thinking about taking more debt and a bigger property. So, and then it promptly announced his wife was pregnant. So, which is the reason for it. So what do you think? We get out of lockdown, it goes back to normal? Do we get out of lockdown and it takes 6 months to come back, or longer? What's your feeling?
I think probably longer, because what we're starting to see, of course, is less and less properties being put on the market in the first place. Right. They're expecting some of the property people that we could see a fall of as much as 10 to 20% in property values. And that's significant because people are in fact buying property. So if you talk to Rightmove and Zoopla, they have so minimal, in certain parts of the country, properties coming on the market. It will take a good period after this period of lockdown is finished. We'll still be doing social distancing, and I still think that's something we can't get away from. So it will take probably a year.
Yeah. Okay, so that's the downsides of what's gone on. What are the positives, if any, at this point? Bearing in mind we're only 4 weeks into the storm, as I call it.
Well, those firms who, for example, PI firms who we've said for a long time, although I hear there's an announcement this afternoon that the MOJ could well delay the implementation of the Civil Liability Act,
Right.
even. But those firms who've got a fairly long book in terms of BINEG, PI, they've been able to work on those longer files. Although the workers are home-based, they're still working on the files. So the PI firms seem to be quite stable in terms of workflow. The other areas I mentioned earlier, there's been a big boom in the wills, lasting powers of attorney market, and eventually we'll see a growth in probate. So the private client element of law firms, which has always been the poor relation in many ways, is starting to be the leader in many firms at the moment.
I designed a program in my head just an hour ago. I got an email from one of my favorite restaurants in London, which is called Condesa, Condesa, if anybody's looking for really good tapas around Covent Garden. And they sent me an email saying, you know, as a loyal customer, we're asking for your support. We'd like to ask you to buy a voucher, which you can swap for meal and wine later in the year. And as a thank you, we'll give you, you know, I think it's a free drink or something, depending on the value you spend. So I was like, yeah, I'll do that, because I've been spending no money apart from food and wine over the last 4 weeks. I haven't been anywhere. I think I fueled the car up just before lockdown. It hasn't moved. And I thought, what would be the law firm's equivalent of buying some loyalty? So we've seen clients, Talbots in the West Midlands are doing free wills for their local NHS. Got a number of other clients, Hedges Law in Oxfordshire, doing heavily discounted. Gardner Leader and Newby are doing raising money for charity. If you have a coffee, I did this morning with Fiona, who's the marketing director, so she donates what would normally be the cost of the coffee into their charity pot. And I was thinking, how do law firms do that kind of buying work? So rather than, I mean, this is, so some wills were 50%, okay, that's great. And then somebody else up the ante and do it free for NHS and key workers. What about we'll do it for free and we'll donate £50 to a charity of your choice to get the will, to build the will bank, to maybe get some more work and maybe do it at slow speed afterwards, where they don't want to do the LPA and all the rest of it. They just want to get it done, because the free will, of course, is a simple one. Yeah. I was just wondering whether there's some mileage in there in terms of law firms knowing that they're doing it for free, so they've got the time cost, but actually investing a bit of the marketing money they're not spending elsewhere into a charity bucket to just try and get more of that work.
That seems a lot of sense to me. I think that there's that one. I think that workers firms certainly have to find ways and means of generating income and offer something else to their existing client base. That seems like a good idea.
Government support packages. What I mean, most firms have taken advantage of furlough, I'm assuming. I mean, the ones I've spoken to have. I'm guessing the same with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Across the board, everyone's taking advantage of furlough.
Okay. At what kind of percentages or numbers? Again, a firm I spoke to just yesterday, there are 150 people and they furloughed 40. I've heard another firm of 60 and they furloughed 40 out of 60, but they were a predominantly res prop practice, so no surprise there.
That's been the key area. If it's res prop, then without question, that's where they've done most of the furloughing. But it's also happened commercial, and I think in other areas of law that people haven't seen the spurts in. So it varies. I mean, different firms, depending on what they do. I've seen anywhere from 40 to 70%. Okay.
And if there was some urgent steps law firms need to take, what would be the top three? You know, the things they haven't done already. And you can't say cash flow modeling, because clearly everybody's done that already.
Sure.
You would think, wouldn't they?
I would have thought so. I think they would be mad if they hadn't. I've been advising a number of firms who've been challenged to say, we're going to default if we don't do something. And the only way you can help them is to say, well, talk to your landlords. See whether you can defer the rent on the property for a few months. Talk to your suppliers, try and delay payments.
No, apart from their web suppliers, they can't do that.
No, fair enough. Obviously, you can defer VAT and tax. Those are key areas that I'm sure most people have thought about anyway. But I do think a number of, and if you do enter into new debt arrangements, because we've got secondary lenders who are still keen to lend, but they're not cheap money. But in the case of it, because even with the way that the loans are coming through, even if we're seeing a reduction, you know, some firms may have to borrow from some of the secondary lenders to keep their business afloat.
And it's interesting, you know, Rishi Sunak, who I think speaks really well, whether he's doing scripted or the Q&A, has been absolutely consistent with his message, which is unfortunate for our industry that we operate in, is we cannot save every job and we cannot save every business. He's been very clear. He said that consistently. So even when he gets a bit of a slating for missing out, you know, directors of small companies, you know, okay, but somewhere you got to draw the line as to who you can support. The latest one this week was for high growth businesses. I think, you know, so clearly they've been taking advantage of furloughs, deferments, but there must be a worry for firms who are indebted already.
Yes.
Who are, whether that's up against loans or up against overdraft limits, that if they're just kicking more debt down the road, they're just delaying the problem, not solving it.
Well, one firm was denied a loan, a government-backed loan, because the bank didn't think they'd be able to meet their obligations after the 12 months.
Right.
That was £100,000, which they're not going to see. Now, what they're going to end up in is default on certain debt, and that's the beginning of a procession towards insolvency. And I think we have to see several of these firms. I've just been exchanging emails with the Law Society Gazette on, is it big firms or law firms that's likely to fail? And I think it doesn't matter about size. I think the size is all about the way the firms run. So if the firm's well managed, then the chances are they'll get the funding. In fact, the firm that you and I both know have rolled up their loans into one new loan and have an interest-free finance for the next 12 months. So they're really happy about that.
But that's not through C-bills, is it? That was just direct to the bank. See, I thought C-bills, you were precluded from refinancing. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So there's
businesses and limited companies. That's where I sit in all this. As a director of a relatively small limited company, I completely fall out of that, any help or support in any way, shape or form. So I know the feeling.
Okay. So in terms of strategic choices, we used to say, you and I made this joke for years, you get big, you get niche, or get out.
Yep.
Okay. So there's still mergers going on. Now these were announced well before, so Moorblatch and Barlow Robbins, they complete on the 1st of May. And I've just got an email today saying that Burkitt's, an East Anglia firm, have just agreed a merger with a niche insurance firm in the city called EC3 Legal. Okay. So and that clearly must have been going through already. I don't think you'd have put that deal together in a couple of weeks.
Yep.
So again, 3 strategic steps for firms. What do they do now?
Well, obviously they've dealt with the issues, immediate issues that they need to do. I think thinking through carefully now what they want to look like when they come out. I was talking to one firm who've furloughed some staff, but have actually made others work from home. But what they did have was an extremely robust IT system which allowed people to do that. And what they've discovered in the last 4 weeks is they don't need to have offices open. So they've closed 2 or mothballed them. In essence, they now will never go back to working with multiple offices and multiple sites. They'll have one central office. People will be working from home. And I think it's trusting their home workers to do that to a large extent. So I think that's the big change.
I was speaking to they're probably a 200-person firm, so I don't know what their turnover will be. North of 10 million, I would think. And the managing partner there said this whole last 4 weeks has accelerated their appetite for being more agile with their working practices by 2 years. He said it's completely derailed any conversations from fuddy-duddy long-time partners saying, oh, we don't trust people to work from home. How can we track what they're doing? I was speaking with one firm. So we're doing a weekly video call on a Friday with a customer who said, actually, the toughest decision they made was having to furlough all their trainees. And this was a compliance issue, which you can talk to next, around much harder to do supervision at distance than it would be when you can just go look over their shoulder and everything. I mean, it's not impossible. And if this was the new normal, you'd find a way around it. But they said in the short term, when you're asking everybody to work a bit harder, it was just one thing too many to ask solicitors or associates to then keep track of a trainee as well. So 2 questions in one. Issue with compliance, and does that lead to more complaints and thus, it coming back to hurt law firms in future?
Well, I think that's the problem, isn't it? If we've seen mistakes starting to occur with people working from home, that can actually cause a lack of supervision, and therefore we could see issues coming in from the SRA. But the SRA are also at the moment working from remotely. So what they're intending to do, from what I've heard, is looking at website suites, looking to see if you're compliant on your website. And that's one of the areas they're looking at, because they can't actually deal with anti-money laundering procedures at the moment. So we're seeing, I think cybersecurity is a big issue, but I think it's making sure that all the things put in place that we know are crucial is kept working on. Because it's mistakes that will cause complaints, not keeping in touch with clients. If there's delays, you've got to keep in touch with the clients and let them know that why there's a delay. If there's costs, make sure that there's hygiene factors are all dealt with. So I think there's some compliance issues coming if they're not dealt with.
Yeah. There was a story that I can't remember whether it was a Gazette website or Legal Futures recently that said, shock horror, law firm that uses SRA template for pricing transparency is told by SRA that it's not compliant. I'm just like, I read that and I think that's an April Fool's joke, but it wasn't the 1st of April. I'm like, so they used the template the SRA told them to use or suggested they use, and then they said it wasn't compliant. That was a great one. No, just prices on website, not to do with actual work or anything. So, so if that becomes an issue, what are your 1 or 2 top tips for staying compliant?
Well, obviously, if they can access remote compliance, so people can log into the system, and if they haven't got compliance officers themselves, then they can outsource that work, and it's there to be done. So I think there's lots of opportunities for taking compliance, doing file reviews remotely wherever possible.
Okay. What about any disaster recovery horror stories, or disaster recovery horror stories, or war stories about firms who thought working from home was going to be great and turned out it was a bit more difficult than expected?
Quite a few. There's a few disaster recovery policies that's out there, which obviously the insurers are trying to claim force majeure, so it's outside their protection. But others who do have part of their policy to cover them for a pandemic of sorts, they still haven't been paid out, and the insurers are still not responding and answering. There's a few firms that have said that's the case. I'm not sure how many firms have actually got that cover, to be honest, but those that do are finding it difficult to get it in place and get it accepted. Yeah,
the stand. I mean, we insure with Hiscox. They got a bit of a battering, I think, at the weekend or late last week. And we have a business interruption policy that doesn't cover pandemics. And my business has been interrupted, but it's not ended, kind of thing. And there were some quite specialist policies that had that kind of cover. If I go back 5 or 6 weeks, I had a few international trips this year, probably, which none are going to happen now. But I actually did go out and buy some additional travel insurance for airline failures. I can't remember the title of the policy, and spent an extra couple £100 over and above my normal policy, just in case I was impacted by one of the ones that have failed, which, touch wood, nobody has yet. Although Richard Branson's trying to make a really good go of it, depending on what the government do.
Well, I'm sure his eyes, perhaps, David, so you could spend your millions on that.
Yeah, we're not there yet, Viv. Cash preservation in the short term. What are you seeing firms doing?
Well, obviously, trying to get suppliers and landlords, as I say, to stabilise on payments, but changing their terms with their clients is probably a good thing. So I've seen some law firms telling their clients that they want cash up front and payment within days. And I think that's something that they have to do if they're going to do the work. They can't afford to carry whip in these circumstances. So getting the cash up front and or changing terms are probably the 2 most crucial things they can do.
Yeah, and we've seen an uptick in firms finally giving in and saying, yes, we should take payments through our website, because it's pretty much the only way you can do it, either with BACS transfers. The last time we saw an uptick in that was pricing transparency in December 2018, where everybody all of a sudden went, oh yeah, we should be able to do pricing calculators and we should take, cash through the site. So we've seen that change. And also, we have lots of conversations with customers who say to us, well, if we're doing a website project, why is it 50% up front? Because we go, well, that's our terms. Yeah. And there's no discussion about it. We just go, those are our terms. So, and law firms should have been able to do that for a long time. So I think that's maybe one of the new normals that we'll see. We have seen a few people pull contracts from us, And it's all about the strength of their balance sheet, going back to what you said earlier. You know, a friend of mine says, just generally, if you were a bad business in February, you're still a bad business now, right? And going back to what the Chancellor said, is we can't save every business. We did have one client ask to reduce their spend on the website by 50%. I said, absolutely, I'll turn it off 12 hours a day then. And they did agree that maybe they were trying to shave a little bit too much off their marketing budget, and they killed everything else.
And all through the day, so it could be on all night.
Yeah, we'll just take one of those. You pick which 12 hours do you want. So last question really is still the future, and you know, if the old joke used to be get big, get niche, or get out. So you can get out in one of two ways. You can just fail and get out, or put the for sale sign up. Any appetite on the street for acquisitions?
Yes, there is, and I think we've got Zoom conferences being set up with some practices, and that's already happening. So they're getting the initial due diligence out of the way, although nothing will happen probably till lockdown is finished. But there's certainly the conversation out there. And I think one advice I would say to any law firm that's in any form of financial difficulty, don't bury your head in the sand. Get some advice now. And even whether it's from someone like me or from an insolvency practitioner, deal with it, because you can't leave it ride forever. It'll only get worse. And I think, what do we see now? I see law firms who've got strong leadership and taking these important decisions early are the ones that's going to come through this even stronger than they were going in. And when we start to look at the way things are changing, I think we will see numerous failures. I've been talking for years about 3,000 firms needing to do something, and I think that's just exacerbated. I don't think it's necessarily small. I think small sole practitioners will find it tough in the short term, but in the longer term will come back even better. It's those with bad management, poorly managed businesses, bad cash ratios, who really haven't adapted to change and technology, and we all know who they are, and there's loads of them. Probably those 3,000, it'll come home to roost. And it's going to be Darwin. I mean, the strong will survive this. Those who are not will find it very difficult to come through the other side. It's never going to be the same as it was. No,
and it's all about the strength of your balance sheet going into this period. If you're the kind of firm who's just taking every penny out, not leaving anything in the business, you know, for growth and funding growth, and you've been doing that for years and bumping up against overdrafts and those kinds of things, it's difficult. My final thought is, most crises have what the 4 stages. I'm just looking at some notes from something earlier: confusion, survival, relief, and renewal. So I think the confusion's gone. That's the last 4 weeks since this all started. I described it as blind panic, mild panic, and now a version of a new normal. So we're very much in that survival phase, and I think that lasts, as I said, till the end of lockdown, and then the back end of the storm is what happens after that, I think. So give me a prediction then. If we're saying there's still about 10,000 law firms in the UK, let's jump forward 2 years. How many at that point?
I think we'll lose at least 3, maybe as much as 5.
Really? You think it's going to go that deep?
I do.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of firms been hanging on by their fingernails for many, many years. And you and I have spoken about this many times. It's those poorly managed businesses that are going to find it very difficult to come out the other side of it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Well, look, Viv, appreciate your time on this sunny Tuesday afternoon. Yeah. One of my favorite LinkedIn posts of the last month is I did an image that showed how I know it's a weekday or a weekend, because I had a photo of me in trainers and a photo of me in slippers, and that's kind of which day and which shoes do I put on. So for those of you who are watching this on the web, we'll put some contact details on the final slide, and Viv and my email addresses will be there, whether it's help with compliance and funding and M&A through our Symphony Legal consulting business, or if you want to help with digital marketing and growth through Conscious Solutions, let either of us know and we'll be in touch. So Viv, thanks. Have a good rest of the week.
Thanks, David. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Don't worry, I can edit that bit out.